Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can find and subscribe to this podcast via Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our site, vmspod.com, to find more information, as well as our RSS feed, which you can plug into any podcatcher so you never miss an episode of the Virtual Memories Show. You can also follow me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube, where I go by vmspod, and subscribe to my semi-weekly newsletter at buttondown.com/vmspod. Well, it is just about the end of 2025, and I continue limping along to the finish line. This is the last interview episode. After this, it is the annual guest list show where I have all the past year's guests talk about the favorite books they read in the year and what they're looking forward to reading next year. Then I'm going to do a year-end solo show, and then goodbye 2025. I'm in a weird mood today, but you guys have heard me in a lot of weird moods. It's partly from lack of sleep, partly from, I'll say, professional exhaustion / burnout, and partly because it is Tom Spurgeon's birthday. Tom, as many of you have heard over the years, was my closest friend. I've talked about him plenty and about his death in 2019. He, in fact, actually, coincidentally, comes up in today's show, and you'll hear all about how much he meant to me and to others. It's kind of a funny coincidence, but his birthday, it's about a month after his death anniversary, makes me think about who I am and what I've done with my life, and what example I set for others. And in a big tikkun olam kind of way, what I do to try to make the world better. And I won't go into that too much here. Like I said, my guest and I talk about it, and I might revisit that stuff for the year-end wrap-up show. So come back for that one. But for now, let's just ignore my moodiness and dive right into the show. My guest this time is Jonathan Sandler, who runs a fantastic blog called Graphic Memoir at graphicmemoir.co.uk. Jonathan's also the author of The English GI, a graphic novel adapted from his grandfather's memoir and drawn by Brian Bicknell. He sent me a PDF of it a couple of years ago, but I hate reading comics on screen, on an iPad, or on my computer monitor. I'm always doing work. And anyway, when I was in London in November, he graciously brought me a copy of the book, which I hope to read during the holiday / New Year's lull. And he'll talk about the English GI and his grandfather's World War II adventures during our conversation, and what it meant to adapt it, to figure out comics as a language, to work with another artist, and eventually we'll talk about working or drawing for himself. But I want to right now hype his graphic memoir blog, because Jonathan does this fantastic job of just getting out and meeting cartoonists and visiting comics exhibitions, reviewing comics that inspire him. But it's weird. He kind of captures that old school blog vibe that predated social media and all the, short, quippy engagement bait bullshit that passes for writing nowadays. It's sort of a throwback in a really good way. And I always enjoy checking out his travels and his meetups. And it's sort of got Tom's spirit to it, kind of championing all sorts of comics and cartoonists with real enthusiasm and without a big financial incentive. Like, it's not all about selling ads that are all over the website or jacking up subscription numbers or trying to get a job in comics. In Jonathan's case, as we'll talk about, he has a non-comics job to support him, but he manages to find space to pursue an art form that he came to late, I'm sorry, he came to it late, not he came too late. And to share the joy of exploring it. So visit graphicmemoir.co.uk. Check out some of his pieces, subscribe to his blog so you get the new ones when they come out, generally weekly. And give the English GI a look. There's links to all sorts of info about it on the site, buying links as well as a trailer, some of the press it's gotten. Does a good job. Now, I should also note that in Tom Spurgeon's spirit, I have inspired Jonathan through my comics-related episodes of the show, as it turns out. He wrote a piece in, I think, March of 25 about why he loves the Virtual Memories show, and in the process includes 182 quotes from 67 of my guests about comics, the creative process, etc. Let me tell you how much mixed joy and dread that inspired in me to know that someone is listening, actually and actively listening to the conversations I have just that closely and taking something out of them and sharing with everybody else. So just to be funny, I decided not to include any pull quotes in the write-up for this episode. So you'll just get the general description of the show and no good quotes from Jonathan in a little text thing. But honestly, I was really touched by what he wrote and glad to know that this work I've been doing has been important to someone. So it was fun to get together with Jonathan during my London stay at the end of October, early November, even if I was a little bleary and getting ready to pack for the flight home. Now, as caveats / explanations / glossary goes, when he mentions the ASTP, that is the Army Specialized Training Program, a little while after we recorded, we learned that the comics critic from The Guardian, Rachel Cook, she was dying from cancer, and that's why she had stopped writing earlier this year, and she died just a few days after we had recorded in early November. Also, Jonathan did get to meet Joe Sacco, had a good conversation with him, he reports, discussions of Gaza and Israel notwithstanding. And as big mistakes go, oh my God, I accidentally said Ed Sorel instead of the late Ed Koren when we talk about selling a comic to the New Yorker. I apologize to both of them for that one. And the other thing I'll say is just the peril of recording with someone who does actually listen to the show and reads my newsletter is that they notice when I repeat stuff that I've said before, and I get self-conscious about repeating stuff that I've said before, and that makes me a little bit weird. So the tone of this one might come off a little strange, but it really is a fun conversation and a great way to end 2025's guests. So here's Jonathan's bio. Jonathan Sandler runs a blog dedicated to exploring the latest in comics, graphic novels, and exhibitions, blending his passion for storytelling with his deep interest in visual art. He studied politics at Leicester University and has spent much of his career in the software industry, leading and managing complex projects. In 2020, Jonathan combined his lifelong love of World War II history and graphic novels to create the English GI, a World War II graphic memoir published by graphicmemoir.co.uk in 2022. A keen sketcher, Jonathan draws inspiration from the intersection of history and art. He lives in northwest London with his wife and 3 children. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Jonathan Sandler. Well, where'd comics start for you?
So, yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, as a child, I read Tintin and Asterix. That was my favourites. I read them time and over again. Did you read them?
Yeah. Except in America, it was European friends of ours who had Asterix, and they were Hungarians, but they had all these albums for some reason, and we just glommed onto that stuff. Tintin was a little bit later for me, and it was when I was already getting into the superhero side of things, so it presented a weird
difference in what comics mean, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, for me, especially Tintin, I just thought they're so well crafted.
Yeah.
I mean, you look back on the stories now and
but everything is of its time.
but just the detail and the geography, the locations. But yeah, so that was where I started. But yeah, I mean, truth be told, comics was just not part of my life up until, I think, occasionally you'd see an article in The Guardian.
Yeah.
Would have, there's a graphic
Bam
novel.
Pow, comics aren't just for kids anymore.
Exactly. You'd see an article, but it really didn't. And then in 2017, 2018, around that time, I did a comics course just for the fun of it, and learned a bit about the art form. And at the end of the course, he offered some books, and one of them stuck out was Adrian Tomina, who obviously a former past guest, and he's still one of my favorites. And the course was the course, and went back to my day life, and it really, in 2020, my son was getting more interested in World War II, so it was, and then I had this moment when I was walking. I was just a walk on my own. It was during COVID. And I'll come on to my grandfather's book, but I just thought I could turn his book into a graphic novel. And then I went out, and the first book I bought was, I don't know if you've heard of George Takei's They Called Us Enemy. George Takei from Star Trek. He wrote a very good graphic novel about the Japanese internment. And there's actually been quite a few of them that have come out in that genre since. So I read that one and just thought, because that's I would say targeted at young adults, but actually I think
it can apply with adults, but it's written in a way that a younger reader.
So I read it with my son, and after that I was like, I'm going to do this project. So now, since the book was published in 2022,
The English GI,
I spent, when you're doing your own book project, you're just, the focus can only be on the book, and that's part of the frustrating thing is, I'd really like to read that book, but you're not going to get the time. So basically, since that book was published, I've spent the last 3 years obsessing really about comics, graphic novels. That's probably what led me to your podcast. So I'm catching up. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of frustrating in a way because, talking about your podcast, and, when I first discovered your podcast in 23, so that's only 2 years ago. I've listened to countless
too many of them,
episodes. But what I realized is there's a back catalogue of, I'd not heard of Chris Ware. I'd not heard of Dan Clowes.
But that's the thing. Everybody comes from their own direction. And somebody wrote me when I did my newsletter last week middle of last week after a dark existential night of the soul in Frankfurt. Woke up, there was an Instagram message from someone saying he was putting his first graphic novel together in the last 18 months, has been catching up on everything I've done. Similar. He's making comics, but knew nothing of a lot of the same figures, Ware, Clowes, people like that, and was learning about them through me and then going back and finding all of this incredible work. But we all did that in different times as all accidents of birth.
I'm ashamed to say, I hadn't even heard of Mouse.
Yeah.
But that was, obviously I ordered Mouse. And Mouse is that's a heavy read. I mean, that's a complex, but it's, even putting the whole Holocaust thing to one side, it's
the complexity of the storytelling, regardless of the subject matter.
It's complex comics.
Yeah.
And now, if I come back to it a couple of years later after I first read it, then I get it. Yeah. But if you're coming at this cold, you've never read a comic since, you're thinking,
well, that's kind of experimental. Yeah. But that was where Spiegelman was coming from. And there's, again, a whole legacy and continuity to all this stuff, not in terms of like Marvel Universe continuity, but that sense of coming out of the underground era from the 60s into the 70s. Where could things go if they weren't going to be about, hippie aspects of sex, drugs, and rock and roll? And Spiegelman started doing the art comics thing. He was co-publishing Raw, which brings you a bunch of guys like Charles Burns and people like that. And it's neat having all that history to go find and having people who can point and say, oh, if you're like that, you should really go check this out. And then finding out what things you don't like.
I like how you call it art comics, because I think you're the only one who does it. Because I think, part of the problem with comics, and I know it's a theme of past guests you've had on the show, is there's the terminology. So comic means funny.
Inherently, yeah. You've got that.
So that's not a good one.
Yeah.
Graphic novel, I think it was, and I did.
I know.
Pete Bagg said it was erotic. It sounds like a porno. I think he said it was. So it's the term, but actually, I think when you look at it, graphic novel.
It's marketing, but at least it
works.
Gives it a name. It puts it in a shelf that you can actually find stuff you're looking for.
I was telling a cousin of mine in Cambridge who helped me with the book, and I told him that it's bande dessinée in France. I thought, that sounds. Why can't we just use the term bande dessinée?
No, but BD has its own weird connotations.
That's true.
In our parlance. But it's finding that stuff, and I've told the story a million times. I was superhero comics from childhood onwards. Started to get into indie comics, but it was still genre-oriented stuff. And then that guy, my first year at college, just handed me an issue of Love and Rockets, and that kind of. But even they were coming out of genre stuff when they were starting.
Is an acquired taste as well. I mean, I've only ordered my first copy of Love and Rockets recently.
Oh, it's the same thing I have with Nick Cave. Yeah. I didn't know where to start, so I never took up listening to the guy, and then I finally had you should just listen and decide what you like, and things can change. But it's. There's so much out there now. Like once upon a time, you could stay on top of everything between, history and what was coming. And now it's, you just have
I try and stay on top of it as much as I can. I mean, the English speaking world is pretty limited, and it's, because
it gives you a smaller set to work from at least.
Exactly.
Yeah. But with the focus, when you started doing the blogging for this stuff, it looks primarily focused on autobio, which is the title for the site too. Talk about your interest in that genre, and then what it's like kind of spreading out into other fiction.
History, I'll be brutally honest in the fact that it
was all accidental.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
that's good too.
I set up when the English GI, and we'll come on to it in a moment, is essentially it's a memoir. Yeah. So I had to, when I published the book, and I self-published it, which we can talk about, I had to set up a website. So I just went, well, let's just go for graphic memoir.
Keep in mind, you're talking to the guy who had chimeraobscura.com, not the easiest of URLs,
exactly.
But it seemed witty at the time.
So then, where I'm coming at it is, as someone that's self-published a book, and I'm actually a big fan of self-publishing. Yeah,
I'll be doing that with mine
because you have to do all the marketing yourself. Because, and I think one of your past guests, even very recently, talking with Dean Haspiel a couple of weeks ago, I think even the big publishers they're not going to give you much. Right. So you have to do the marketing yourself, and part of it. You've got to review other people's books. You've got to get into the minds. You've got to really understand how it all works.
Be part of
it's a community.
I was going to say ecosystem, but community is a much better, friendlier way to put it.
Yeah. So generally, my interest has primarily been in memoirs, but Clyde Fans. Yes. Is still up there. I'd say Clyde Fans and by Seth, the Canadian cartoonist, and Blood of the Virgin, which I recently reread and posted about by Sammy Harkham. Again, all these past guests.
Also in that book of Instax over there. Yeah.
Those for me stand out, and they're not. Then they really are novels. I mean, they could be, in my view, great American novels or Canadian novels. But they're not, they're not plot orientated. They're character studies,
and that's what's great about the form. It's the flexibility and the acceptance that this can be as good as whatever other forms of storytelling or narrative form exists, and non-narrative at times. The challenge with Clyde Fans was. You're very lucky because you came after it was finished.
Right.
That's one that was decades, and it was just years and years in between installments. And it's like, now I got to go back and make sure I remember the last couple before I tackle the next Palookaville that has this, waiting for the final version to come out. And this is all part of the challenge of comics serialization and,
well, I mean,
collection.
there's so many.
Yeah.
I mean, I keep on discovering more and more. I mean, we had, obviously Mouse was serialized back in the day. Blood of the Virgin by Sammy Harkin was serialized. Jason Lutz's Berlin, another one
with a big gap.
That's definitely in the top 5 of all time.
Yeah. But another one though that it was coming out in pamphlet form, and then it was getting longer and longer between installments, and then it was we're just going to publish the big collected edition and not serialize the last couple of installments. But that's just part of the challenge of the economics and the business side of comics, which you also deal with.
We were lucky enough to have Craig Thompson in London.
Oh, I saw. He had
a few weeks ago.
piece.
So he talked us through that whole process of pamphleting.
Yeah,
making
and that was. He and I talked about that, and it was very interesting just seeing how somebody with a massive success with the first graphic novel still had to look at other ways of producing the work so that eventually, you could see a final edition like that. But tell me about the English GI. What was the process for you in terms of understanding what you were even trying to do in terms of making a comic?
So the great thing is I'm not sure I could do it now because I went in with pure ignorance.
Knowing what you know now.
Oh my God,
exactly.
what was I
thinking?
Ignorance is good. And I think that, in all seriousness, I think it's important because I do interview authors and I ask them for their inspirations, and especially people, and some of them just, they want to do the project. They don't want to start because if I'd spent 2 or 3 years reading every World War II associated graphic novel, the project would never have taken off. So I had that moment where I decided I was going to do it, and then a week or 2 later, I found an illustrator, a guy called Brian Bicknell, who's based in Massachusetts. And I got in touch with Brian, and I basically gave him the text of for my grandfather's original book. Gave him the text of the first chapter of the first, and said, "Go do something with it."
Yeah.
And he came back, and I was like, "This is awful." Not his illustrator, but just like this is not
understand what you wanted to see.
So then I realized I took a 6-panel grid and said, I drew it out myself. So my drawing's okay. I just drew the whole thing out myself, directed it, sent it over to Brian. He sent it back to me. It was pretty much bang on.
Good.
And then I knew this relationship could last. So it was a very much, I took an approach of enjoy the journey, because the destination will be whatever it is. But I don't want to not enjoy it, because this isn't a commercial venture. This is a passion project. So I didn't even, I had an advantage. So my grandfather had written the story from A to Z. The book was there. It was probably only about 30 or 40 pages of text. So, we're not talking. So I thought, well, I don't know how long this is going to be. Maybe it's only 20 pages. It's fine. But I did it chronologically, 1 page at a time with Brian. So I sent him we did this process, sent him 1 page at a time, and he'd come back and then it naturally evolves, as you can imagine. But actually, it wasn't until when we finished most of it and went back and we added more pages here, and then it becomes
it's
a
an
bit
iterative
messy.
thing that
it becomes
always,
a bit messy. Yeah,
I wonder about with cartoonists in general, whether it's first time or somebody who's been doing this for years, what that, we'll say, editorial process is like, because you can't just pull panels and rearrange things.
It's messy. It's messy, and I'm thinking about potentially doing another project. It's very early days. I've got the ideas, but I'm thinking the one thing I've learned over the last 3 years is I think what people want is authenticity. So I would do the whole thing myself, even if the drawing's not to a standard.
You're talking to a guy who's drawn 2 comics total, one of which is in that zine that I just gave you. But
right.
but yeah,
so I just think that authenticity, and that's so when I started the project, I knew ultimately, there's going to be a base audience. There's friends, family.
The easy marks.
And it's going to be, it's got to be to a certain standard. And also the drawings really mattered to me, as you would expect. So I wanted the details. I wanted, this book is set in 1940s New York. I want
to look like it's there.
Yeah, exactly. I want the place names and everything.
You listen to the Dean episode that I did a few weeks ago. I talk about drawing another 2-pager recently about the time I found the dead guy, and how I, after submitting it to the editors, happened to send it over to Eddie Campbell, the cartoonist who I've adored since I was 17 or so when I first came across his comics, and he gave this incredible amount of edits, but then went into the PDF that I sent him and actually did all of the changes to make. I was just in awe, A, from the work that he put into it, B, that every choice he made was perfect, because he's somebody who is a practitioner of this for decades. And so, that white outline you're doing with a black background, not quite touching the figure, get rid of that. That's something Bill Finger used to do. Just go ahead and all sorts of little things that he could see what I was doing as shorthand because I'm not an artist. He was like, you didn't have to do it this way. If you just did this, it would be perfect. And he was right in every instance.
It is difficult. I mean,
but you just don't know until you practice.
The hardest thing is the choice. What do you put in the panel? That's it's when the face of it, well, it's quite simple, but actually that is, and then once you've chosen it all, you have to take a step back and look, does it all flow with the page? If you've got the right balance, close-ups, wide shots. So that, but so what, the project was enjoyable. So first thing you
got the bug. So
you needed reference photos. So even just finding the reference photos. I mean, there's loads of stuff. 1940s New York. You Google it. There's hundreds. But actually, so that was quite addictive. Getting then there's the family photographs. Then the other part of the project was actually getting a story verified. So obviously it's self-published, so I could just go with it. But that was quite. So I did find a number of memoirs that verified the story.
Timing overlapped with what he was doing.
It's. I mean, just for this, there's very high level. There's two parts of the story. One is my grandfather, Bernard Sandler. He was born in 1922. Grew up in a middle-class Jewish family in the north of England. Age 17, he took a journey with his school, very privileged to do so, to the United States. It was August of 1939. The war was declared, at least the UK declared war in September 39, and he was stranded in New York. So that was the drama associated with that. And then what unravels is that he as a 17-year-old, he stays on in New York. He's put in touch with the family, friends, but essentially it's a coming-of-age story. Yeah. And he ends up being drafted into the U.S. Army in
after 1941. That's when we started.
Yeah, exactly. He was drafted and did his basic training in 43. But what unravels is that there's a lot of ups and downs along the way. Mm-hmm. And we always look back on the war and we think, we know that happened. We know it's going to end in 45, but of course they don't know that.
Yeah, we've got our historical.
But there were a lot of ups and downs. And there was a cohort of people, which includes Mel Brooks, actually, and famous politicians such as Bob Dole, Mayor Ed Koch.
Jack Kirby was over there.
Jack Kirby. But there was a special cohort my grandfather was part of that they took IQ tests in about in 43. They took IQ tests and they were into this selected group called the ASTP. I forget what it stood for, but anyway, it's the ASTP, and 100,000 of these people were sent to become engineers. So they were not meant to be on the front lines. Yeah. These people were going to rebuild Japan and Germany. That was the plan from the US government. That plan was ripped up in February of 44, and this group of people ended up being thrown to the wolves, essentially. Yeah. And so that's where I've done quite a bit of research even since then. These former ASTPers, as we call them, which includes Brooks and it includes, as I said, those politicians. It also includes even Kurt Vonnegut,
Oh,
So there's a whole group of people that had this. Oh, they were suddenly thrown into the war. Yeah, and then the story is the story. But so so there were two memoirs in particular that stood out. One was. There was a guy called Victor Lundy. He's I don't know if you've heard of him. He was he's a very famous, eminent architect. He died maybe a year or two ago, age 101.
May have been in my newsletter. That's why I'm thinking of him. Yeah. Everybody loves the RIP section. In
He was, and Lundy sketched out his war. I mean, he has maybe 200 or 300 sketches, and he donated them to the Library of Congress in about 2010, 2011. And suddenly you're looking at this sketchbook, and various people have published it into books, because there was no proprietary about it. He just donated them, and anyone could do what they want with it. So actually the front cover of the English GI is based on a sketch from Victor Lundy. So that was an amazing discovery. And I only discovered it midway through the book. It's like, oh, there's a whole...
Only I had all this. Yeah.
I mean, they were better than... In some ways, it was better than photographs, because, I mean, his drawings were it was incredible. So there was the Victor Lundy story. And the other one was someone called Robert Kotlowitz. So he is the father... Have you heard about Alex Kotlowitz? He's actually a neighbor of Chris Ware, I seem to discover later on in Chicago. So Robert Kotlowitz is I mean, he died in about 2012. He was a Jewish author, television producer, distinguished guy, and he wrote his memoir called Before Their Time, that was serialized in the New York Times, probably in the mid-90s whenever he wrote it. So that was a whole different. So this wasn't a factual memoir. It was just a beautifully written book. Just wasn't a history book. Just a really good memoir.
Gotcha.
So those and there was one scene in the book where he talked about as a Jewish soldier, he had his dog tags, and it said H for Hebrew on his dog tags. I didn't know about that. My grandfather never mentioned it. No. So we worked it into the book. I was like, this is too good. This is too good a story not to have in the book. So that was, and there were other memoirs that were written which were more like my grandfather's, more just but they all had this same chronology. So that was a great discovery for me.
What was the rest of your family's World War II experience like that you know of? What stories did you hear growing up?
My grandma is still alive. She lives in Glasgow. My mum's side of the family come from Scotland, and she talks about the war. In some ways, it was quite a fun time, because she was. I mean, at the time they were all out in a place called Ayr on the Scottish coast, and there was, dancing with US soldiers, and there was all sorts of. Whereas my grandfather, who was 10 years older, and I knew him very well. He died about 10 years ago. He was a doctor in the British Army, and he served out in Africa, and then towards the end of the war, he was part of the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, and damn, I'd never asked him about that. Because the interest comes. So,
I mean,
exactly. So we've got various photographs, and he wrote his memoirs, but he wrote his memoirs and he stopped it at 1939. But no.
This is one of the, again, recent episodes with Ron Rosenbaum about his Bob Dylan kind of biography, as he calls it, and Dylan's affinity for J.D. Salinger, who was one of the liberators in Auschwitz and never recovered from that. And it was something that really hadn't come out about Salinger until recent years, where guys started really going into his history and realized, oh, wait a second, that's the wound at the center of everything. There was this insane trauma of just showing up and discovering what had gone on, and what it meant to try to save the few people who were left. I
mean, it's interesting on the subject of trauma. So back to Robert Kotlowitz, he had an interview with NPR, which I managed to find, and I mean, his story was quite horrific. He had to play dead for 24 hours, and he was saying in the podcast that the U.S. Army, they just didn't know how to deal with it.
It just soldier's heart was and shell shock were the term. And again, there was no psychology to figure this stuff out, but yeah,
and
I could imagine.
There's also a book I read, and I'm embarrassed. I remember the title. Now I've remembered. Schultz, Carol Schultz, Carol Vento Schultz. She wrote a book called D-Day Daughter. Her father was one of the big heroes of World War II, but he was not. She, in her book, her thesis is, we miss the mythology of the greatest generation. Unfortunately, her father went through a couple of marriages and went to alcoholism, so that was sort of a hidden story.
Yeah, and Carol Tyler, when you get to, if you've done Soldier's Heart,
I've read Soldier's Heart.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That's part of the, if you haven't, this is, yet another comics thread to go down.
That's that's a good segue, because Carol Tyler has a new book coming out. She's got an exhibition at...
I just got the Ephemerata. I have not started it yet, because it was right before I
she's got an exhibition at the Billy Island
in...
And it's a virtual exhibition.
Oh, they're going to have a...
Yeah, good. It's on the 5th of November.
Have you gotten out to the Billy yet? You've done some US trips.
No, so one of the...
They're actually going to be closing because of ventilation updating for a while.
So they're doing a virtual tour. So it's not quite the same thing. But one of the things
We'll get you out there.
One of the things I've... during the last 3 years is exhibitions.
Yeah. So, and I've seen you've posted from New York, from LA, places like that.
So, I mean, firstly, one of the I wanted to talk about was I don't know if you've ever been to Basel.
No, never been to Switzerland at all.
So you have to go to Basel.
I've been told.
Firstly, it's a great pharma city. So we went.
Yeah, I know. Novartis and Roche keep telling me, we got to bring you out here, but they never actually pay for it.
My son and I went to Basel in the summer. Alison Bechdel had a retrospective.
Yeah.
So they've got this museum in the center of Basel called I think it's the Basel Cartoon Museum. So I've been for the last 3 years. 23 they had Chris Ware, 24 Richard Maguire. This year they had Alison Bechdel. Yeah. And my son is very into medicine. So we went to Roche. In the morning, we went to Roche. In the afternoon, we went to the back. That was the...
Again, I spent Tuesday through Thursday at the CPHI Pharmaceutical Ingredients Conference, and then fly out to England and do my comics thing.
You need to get to that, because they actually have a great visitor centre.
The great one, though, 2003, they had that same conference in Brussels. And this is back when I was doing a magazine in that space instead of a trade association, and my publisher and the other editorial people, we're all going out here for dinner. Where are you going to go tonight, Gil? I said, I'm actually taking a certain subway line that goes all the way out to a station that is completely filled with murals by Hergé of Tintin characters. Fuck all of you. This is what I care about doing. And I'm just picture after picture, and with a shitty digital camera, but just... I've got to go see the Hergé station in Brussels.
I'll take a note of that. So exhibitions for me, they're few and far between. I've been to and luckily they are. So when I was in Basel this summer for the Bechdel one, I've been to Basel before. I wanted to go somewhere else. So we went over to Frankfurt, which I know you've just come back from, which is not a city you associate with
anything.
Yeah, but actually they've got a fantastic Jewish museum there.
Okay.
Which is worth visiting. But they had an exhibition in a place called Wiesbaden, which is about an hour from Frankfurt.
Yeah.
And Nora Krug.
Oh.
You've heard of Nora Krug?
I've recorded with Nora a couple times.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So Nora Krug had an exhibition.
The Heimat book.
About Heimat. And there were 3 other graphic novelists, one of them called Hannah Brinkman. I thought I managed to get an interview with Hannah. And 2 other ones, Bridget Way and Toby Darman. They had so this exhibition was in Wiesbaden. It was free, open to the public, to get them. Absolutely fantastic exhibition.
Good.
But at the end of the exhibition, I was like, can I buy a postcard or a poster? It had no
gift shop.
no gift shop. Yeah, exactly. It was just this is. I just thought this is a fantastic exhibition. I'm not sure anyone's. This is like in a public library.
You figure I'm coming from America where public funding for the arts doesn't really exist. Yeah. So, seeing other countries actually splurge on this sort of thing and not make it, the one national event, but just a regional, exhibition. We want to bring in these people and show off the culture.
Exhibitions that you just see, it's still a journey to get them into the big gallery. So I was lucky enough to be in LA in the summer. We go every year because my wife's family based in San Diego. Yeah. And I went to the Kirby exhibition at the Skirball. I don't know if so that was a treat.
Yeah.
And of course nowadays I try and get in touch with cartoonists whenever I can. So as you found,
some schlub from New Jersey who shows up here.
So I got in touch with Graham Chaffee.
Yeah.
And Graham says, "Oh yeah, I'll meet you at the Skirball." So we had a coffee.
He is one of the most easygoing guys in the world.
I got his new book from. Yeah. Well, it's not so new anymore. A couple of years ago,
a year and a half.
Light it, shoot it, and signed copy. So bring me a print. You want to support the artist. And I walked around the Kirby exhibition with Graham Chaffee, so that was a treat. Getting his perspective on things, and also as we talked about Sammy Harcum, I was in LA. I thought, oh, can I meet up with Sammy Harcum? So I went on his website. There's actually a couple of prints. I said I need to buy them, so I bought the prints. Anyway, we started getting involved in the WhatsApp conversation. I mean, that's how approachable. It didn't work out. We couldn't meet them. But
that's the thing. When you get into this, and I talk about it from like the comics practitioners thing lately with a couple of guests, like the one I did with Kayla E. This came up. They're not celebrities. I mean, we may idolize their work, but these are normal folks. As long as you're not like an obsessive, I'm your number one fan sort of person, they're probably, if they've got time, they'll get together, or at least, be able to talk with you, do a Zoom thing, or, email. In Kayla's case, what came up was when she was coming up as a cartoonist, she was reaching out to Chris Ware and Ivan Brunetti and a few people like that. And she is still amazed that they gave her the time of day, much less actually looking at her work and giving her good feedback. The thing I told her was they were all in your boat. There was never a golden child legacy system of making it in that world. They all came up as essentially, we were struggling, starting out, didn't know anybody, and oh, hey, I love this person's work. So they recognize.
It's interesting. So Kayla E, I listened to the podcast, and her book is on the long TBR.
You'll need to be in the right emotional space.
I gather it's something. I mean, So I will get to that book. I even have a spreadsheet at home with books. I have
a spreadsheet of guest-related books, but
this is on the must-read. But it does, if I get to it in 2 years, it's fine. But it was profiled in the New Yorker, and one thing I've really realised is that very few, even the New Yorker, which you would have thought, given that Françoise Mouly is the editorial director, which is she's the wife of Art Spiegelman, very few graphic novels are profiled in the New Yorker. Maybe 4 or 5 a year.
And it's usually ones that have broken through already in some way. And it's tough, but it's still a form that is, there's some connoisseurship to it.
Yeah.
Where, literature doesn't have prose literature doesn't have the same associated stigma of, comic books, that still lingers. Or you could say, I don't read comics, I read Mouse, but that's again a graphic novel. That's a different thing. It's tough to justify, and sometimes you need to include illustrations of it. You need to have samples and visuals for it, where with prose reviews or profiling a writer, you don't have to. You can have a little inset paragraph of an excerpt from them. It's just a different
I mean the New York Times, I think, does it regularly?
They did more once upon a time, but all book reviews have diminished in the US.
It's just because in the UK, I mean, the Guardian had a graphic novel of the month, which went on. It's stopped in the last 6 months. I think there's a reason why, but it was Rachel Cook was the journalist who. She did the reviews. They're absolutely excellent. She just did really good reviews, and she was Faber did a talk with her on the panel back in February, which I went to, and I got to ask her a question. There's like, how do you pick your books? And she said, there's so many now, and she said that she deliberately chooses books that non-comics readers would be interested.
Yeah, and that's a certain type,
Yeah.
where, things that require, again, a degree of connoisseurship and a degree of that background. You can tell people to read Chris Ware and Jimmy Corrigan, Smartest Kid on Earth, but a general reader is going to look at that and be intimidated.
Yeah.
They're going to have to.
I was intimidated when I first read it.
Yeah, you realize you have to commit and you have to learn some of the visual language and what he's trying to do. It becomes incredibly rewarding, but it's not just like we've had those podcasts about Ernie Bushmiller and the Nancy comic strip, where it's harder not to read Nancy than to read it. You just put it in front of someone and boom, there they go. So you can understand how that with that as your editorial criteria, it can become limiting just in terms of the sorts of things you're going to tackle, where you can tell people it has a great starting point, but if you move up here, you're going to start to find really, really great stuff. Again, Clyde Fans is great, but the stillness of it and what Seth is doing is not how you want to introduce somebody to comics.
No, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
You can see how there's things that you need those steps to really build up with. And that's, part of what we all do. We have our education with these things.
It was Craig Thompson was, he was in London, as I said, last month, and he was interviewed by Paul Gravett, who's one of the great UK comics aficionados. I've met Paul a few times. And during the interview, Craig was lamenting the fact that being a comic artist, you make no money, and it's a really tough industry, and that was leaning into AI and what's the future going to be, but then is it just going to become more and more commercialized, etc. But then I think it suddenly dawned upon him in the conversation that works like Ginseng Roots. Have I pronounced it
Probably.
right? Yeah.
I didn't know how to pronounce it when I reported with him. I was like, well, let him say the title the first time.
And I've not read it. It's on my bookshelf, signed copy. I need some space and time to read it. Yeah. If it was a commercialized industry, you wouldn't get people writing books.
It's like we talk about with movies all the time.
Exactly.
All of these films that could come out in the 80s and 90s, especially with that second indie wave in the 90s, that doesn't exist. You're trying to get the biggest market. You're trying to make sure China will maybe admit your movie, through all of its government control, and other regions. This is no longer this is a $20 million small scale, very funny or very, devoted indie film. The market for it just doesn't exist. So sometimes, be
careful what you wish for. Like everyone wants more. Yeah, but
the infrastructure can make things really difficult. Yeah, but it's part of why the closest I've come to mainstream comics guests have been Dean Haspiel, who always says he's too artsy for mainstream, too mainstream for the arts, and Howard Chaykin, his predecessor, who exemplifies that more than anybody else. Years ago, someone pitched me on, I don't know, some DC Comics writer / artist, and basically, I'm friends with him. Do you want to connect? I'm like, the guy whose career goal was drawing the Green Lantern is not, not exactly someone I think I can connect with. And there's plenty bigger podcasts for him to go on and lots of publicity to get. But there is that sort of independent or arts mindset versus the I just want to crank out my 22 pages or whatever the IP related thing. I want to work on somebody else's idea for a while. Which is very different than adapting your grandfather's memoir, which is, its own IP thing, but I'm kidding.
Yeah, no, that was,
You've done this for about 3 years, like you said, in terms of reviewing and then interviewing. What have you learned about interviewing? Especially with cartoonists.
Yeah, well...
They're superstitious and cowardly lot. That's an old Batman reference.
Yeah, it's... Yeah, I think certainly the process of interviewing is you just got to listen to people. I mean, that's you've really got to listen to what they want. I've spent more time interviewing people like myself that have done debut books rather than seasoned cartoonists. So, and the people, there must be at least 10 or 12 people that I've met. Including someone called Ralph Shane, who wrote a book about his grandmother's World War II story, Holocaust story. She was from Denmark, and there was a whole story about how the Danish Jews escaped. It was a young adult book. And just the stories that behind the graphic novel, I find that the interesting bit, and then the process. Everyone's process is slightly different. Everyone's inspirations is different. Those are the things that
Have you learned things that would have helped when you were doing the English GI? Were there, oh, God damn it, I wish I'd spoken to this person before I started.
One thing I have learned is people spend years on these projects. I mean, people can spend 10 years, 5 years. I mean,
look at the Blood of the Virgin, Sammy Harkham's thing, and that was 10 plus years of serializing, getting back to it.
One thing I've learned about myself is, and it's a common thing now, is about constraints. So, Matt Madden, of course.
I was just going to say, you got to listen to the Matt Madden one again.
But actually, my constraint when I did the book was I wanted the project to be a year. A year is a good amount of time. I think my grandfather's 100th birthday would have been October 22, and I started it December 20. So, 18 months. And I hit that. I actually was 6 months early. I thought that was actually going to be quicker, but these projects can last so long. And I've seen people spend quite a lot of resources, time, making mistakes. And so I'm quite grateful. I'm a big fan of efficiency, just from my day job. So therefore, you can really spend so much time on these projects, and people have,
Yeah, without going into any detail that will get you in trouble, tell me about the day job.
Yeah, so I work for a software company, Site Tracker. It works. We sell critical infrastructure software, mainly globally. It's a software company based in Montclair, New Jersey.
Oh, that's 35 minutes from me.
I've actually only been there one time. Beautiful town.
If you're going to be again, let me know. It's the closest thing we have to a college town in the state of New Jersey. Basically.
Really nice town. I mean, when we obviously went out in Manhattan when we were there, but no, it's on its growth path, mainly to the renewables. We started in telco, and now we move over to the renewables sector. But yeah, it's on the sales side. So it's the day job.
I understand it. I just wasn't sure if there's aspects of it that have fed into
there's
anything
not
that you
much,
do.
The only thing, so I used to be more involved in project management of software projects, and there's a certain back in the day
process. Yeah.
Back in the day, the theory in software was they had the waterfall theory where everything had to be planned, designed up front, and then you would build the specification. As time went on, it's become much more iterative, and I've noticed even in if you're doing a comic or a graphic novel, it's a huge you've got to think very carefully about the workflow. Because if you go straight from the story to the sketching to the inking to the coloring, once you've gone to the cut, it's difficult to go back. So it's having that iterative process. I think actually it was Graham Chaffee, one of your guests, that said that he just did a page at a time.
And for Graham, work and family and everything else also, mitigate against. He can't spend 6 months just, I'm going to do this comic and nothing else. I think he understood when you talk about constraints that, there's also work, life, et cetera, to balance with that, and, figured out if I do it in this way, I can make these pages and not be overcommitting.
Ritu Modan, again, one of my favorites. She was like, it takes 7 years to make a book. A year doing the research, a year doing the story.
Her type of book, yeah. And
I mean, that's too long.
But
the results are brilliant.
That's the thing. If you're not her, it's great. You get to see the books when they're completed. You don't see everything that goes into them, which again I think is part of what comes out through doing this. Part of what comes from just getting to know these guys. And when you see, I'm not quite sure why it was 7 years in between books, and it's I started this and then the publisher went under, or I got called by this company to consult for them, and things that just derail you from working on the art. I think part of that is, for the most part, this sort of genre of comics is not a profession. You know, you're not doing this solely for the sake of, you're not making all your living from doing this. And most writers don't make a living from their writing. So you have to figure out what that balance is and then, start accommodating or do the bipolar.
I was going to ask you, how do you think, because I've listened to,
too much,
but I've seen that journey. Comics have been on a journey pretty much since was it Jules Pfeiffer? He said, finally, the New York Times are doing a review of a graphic novel. What took them so long? So graphic novels have got their place. I think it's plateaued. I don't think it's got its increase. I mean,
no. I mean, they're now just there.
They're just there. Exactly.
It's no longer a shock to run a review of somebody's stuff and have we're going to have a special graphic novel that we're fun. It's there. It's incorporated, but it doesn't have a place of privilege by any means.
How do you see the
I tend not to. I always tell people not to take reviews seriously, whether they're writers or cartoonists or whatever. A friend of mine who spent 7 years working on a book praised out the wazoo one negative review in a significant venue, and he was so angry and crushed. And I told him, I know it's not going to help, but all the other reviews were great. I know this is the only one you're going to remember, but all those other ones from equally large stature.
I got one stinking review from a pretty good, but it was fair. It was interesting. There's a new graphic, I'll take a graphic biography about Will Eisner that's come out.
I've heard about it, but I haven't seen it yet.
By Dan Mazur as the artist. I was lucky enough to meet with the publisher when I was in New York in May, NBN, and I did a review for my site. It's a really beautiful book. It's a difficult thing to do a comics biography, and I was just being reviewed in the Comics Journal last week and was not a good review. It was a pretty heavy review. But I think it wasn't entirely. I think it was it was a mixture of positive and negative. But I think
the negative stuff can really, especially within comics. There was another cartoonist I recorded with in recent years who decades-long project. I've been making comics for a very long time. But got this negative review in the journal. We were supposed to do a remote podcast, and I just can't do it this weekend. I'm too annihilated by this review right now. I'm like, no problem. We'll get to it, a couple of weeks from now. I'll actually be in your area so we could sit down in person. And he had recovered subsequently.
I want to just make it clear on the record. It's an excellent book. This
you were saying you give it a good review.
No, really, really. And it's such a tough thing to do, a comics biography. Because I've actually read quite a few recently. There was, I met someone called Eric Orner.
So you did your piece on Barney Frank.
And he did a biography of Barney Frank, and it's difficult. You've got to really go into detail on certain parts of their life. You can't. It's different from a written biography.
The areas that are going to require real storytelling. It can be very different than. This is the chapter I need to get in here, as opposed to this is only a limited number of pages for a cartoonist. Yeah. So, you have a white whale, somebody you're hoping to interview, besides me, of course.
I'm probably not going to. There is, I have a list of people that I want to interview, but I just sort of go with the flow. I'm not just whatever sort of piques my interest. I want to try and I do have a little bit of an obsession about covering all the great World War II associated graphic novels, and I would even call Blood of the Virgin. I know we've talked about it before.
Yeah, there's
that middle bit where they're talking about Budapest in 1943. It's almost silent graphic novel. I think there's no major hit. I just want to keep on enjoying it. I think meeting people in person is definitely makes a big difference.
That was, again, you only encountered my show a few years ago, but before pandemic, it was only in person.
Yeah.
And with COVID, I'll start doing remotes because we all have to. I've kept with it in certain instances because it creates opportunities. But yeah, it's not the same.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we got to meet in London. I just thought at some point he's going to be in London.
Yeah, I figured that was that's like the tiers in like Kickstarters and things like that. Only the people who actually read my newsletter or listen to the show would know, oh, he just said he's going to London. Everybody else would just have I saw Gil post something on Instagram, or I heard afterwards he was here. So yeah, you got the higher tier bonus by actually reading my shit. That's always good. So how does your wife take all the
She's not,
because I figure ours could compare notes.
She's got no interest.
Oh, I just mean in terms of the time you spend on
yeah,
great. We've got to go to Basel to a comics.
Yeah, no, we were in the Netherlands at Christmas time last year, and we were looking where to go, and I found out there was an exhibition of Amy de Jong. Have you heard of Amy de Jong?
The name sounds familiar.
Yeah, so she did her big graphic novel was Days of Sand, which was about the Dust Bowl. And no, it was a successful graphic novel. And she also recently did a graphic adaptation of Lord of the Flies, which has got, I haven't read it, but it's got great reception. Okay. And she was doing a retrospective at the Kunsthal in Rotterdam, which is a beautiful,
I had my first trip to Rotterdam this May.
Magnificent art museum.
Yeah.
And they had a floor dedicated to Amy. So I said, well, should we try Rotterdam? And actually, my son and my wife went to the Maritime Museum, and I went to Kunsthal with my daughters. And I think we blended in. Yeah.
Okay. And mine refers to herself as a podcast widow because of the amount of time on weekends. It's, well, I'm headed into the city for 2 hours to record with somebody and turning back around and coming back. But, or some of the longer insane trips I've done to do this, including the...
When I was in this summer in California...
We do a lot of driving in America.
I have a cousin that, sadly, she lived in Palisades, and she was...
After the fires,
it burnt down. So it was a chance to visit her. She was moved to Calabasas, and there was also the Jack Kirby. And I was just like, I'm going for the day. I just rented the car. We were based in San Diego. It was like, it was a 2.5, 3 hour drive.
Yeah, I will off mic tell you one of the funnier stories I have of LA and San Diego and podcasting that I don't talk about on mic because it involves illegal activities. Right. But, I'll fill you in. Although it does include a cartoonist who, next time you're out there, you'll need to sit down and record with, and I will give you the introductions.
It would be much appreciated.
So what do you want to know about me?
Well, how many years has it been? 14?
2012. So we're going on year 14.
14. Yeah, just consistency. How do you manage to do it?
Monastic devotion. That's what some guy who was doing a profile of Harold Bloom said when he started. He found my episode with Bloom and then started finding out about me and had the same question and used the term monastic devotion. So I'm going with that at this point. It's the regularity is important. For me, structure and having a repeating thing is a lot better. Because I started with, in 2012, infrequent. Whenever I do one of these, I'll do one of these. 2013, okay, I'm going to try and do these bi-weekly, and ended up getting about 35 out that year. 2014, the same year I quit my job and launched a trade association, I'd said, I'm going to do this show every week with 1 or 2 off, so I'll have 50 a year. And that's been it since 2014. This has come out pretty much every week for year upon year upon year. When my dad died this summer, the shitty part of it was I was actually hoping to take that month off so I could work on the book that I'm doing, and that turned into, I'm going to end up taking the month off and going through an emotional, thing before realizing, Gil, sitting down and having a conversation with a person you've never met would probably actually be useful for you. So it's the same thing when I was taking a train up to Cambridge and back yesterday and hauling this tote bag filled with all this gear, walking. I got in an hour and a half early and walking all over, shoulders starting to bend down.
Isn't it? Yeah.
But, the guest who I'd recorded with back in 2015, she said to me, just thank you so much for going to all this effort and coming here. I'm like, I don't know how to tell you this, but this is the thing that gives me life. This is going out and doing this is what matters.
I wanted to ask you about Tom Spurgeon, because I know that's just sometimes.
Tom was the closest friend I had.
How did that friendship come about?
It came about because Tom was the editor of the Comics Journal back in the 90s, and this is when email is just starting to become a thing. And I emailed the Journal a couple of times with first a couple of just weird typos that they had that, this actually changes the meaning of X, Y, and Z, fix this up. And then I had back-to-back emails critiquing or, commenting on articles they had published in which I referenced Tom Stoppard's Arcadia, 1970s NBA and American Basketball Association player, and the Claremont and Byrne X-Men from the 70s into the 80s. And at that point, Tom had a fear that he was having one of those blackouts where there was a second persona who was writing all these things. It was actually him, because all these interests were his interests too. When we connected over, again, Stoppard, basketball, and the X-Men, he was making a trip from Seattle, where the Journal was based, to New York to see a couple of plays. And we got together to see Ivanov with Kevin Kline in the lead, who had a bad performance. I did not notice this, but Tom noticed that at the curtain raising, Kline was in the process of throwing a chair across the stage because he was so angry. And Tom and I met then, and we'd already been corresponding by email, but we became closer once we had in-person conversation. And then he became the closest friend I had, my conduit into comics, to just know what was going on in comics. But he cared about a lot more than that, a much bigger figure. Yeah. But he was around when I started the show. So he died in the fall of 2019, just a few months before COVID. And last thing I'd emailed him was that the Pete Bagg episode I had done had just gone up. That was what I remembered sending from a hotel I was in Pennsylvania for a client event. And then when I got home from that event a day or so later, I got the news that he had died. The significance he had in our world of comics cannot be overestimated. Tom championed a lot of people, and he didn't do it for personal gain. Just the same way there's no money in what I do with the podcast. This is what I do for love. Tom was doing that, but there was no other significant money source. He worked and had jobs, but the comics thing was really what drove him. And he cared. So his loss, a lot of people still have the absence of him, and the fact that no one's come up with yes, I'm going to do the Tom Spurgeon thing. It's always I'm going to launch a multimedia version of, something that's going to promote comics, but also make me money. He was important, cared, intellectually rigorous, understood the social downsides of comics. He had a essay called Comics Made Me Fat. There's a degree that he understood what comics mean when you're a kid and the social isolation he had. And in that time, it was the superhero genre. And the comfort that they provided without, as he became an adult, subscribing to the nostalgia. Like when we see adults in their 40s, 50s, et cetera, buying superhero comics in stacks that are, 5 inches high because they just want to keep getting their fix of whatever they liked when they were 12. He understood the appeal when you're 12, but he understood how you grow beyond all that stuff. He was a special person. Losing him has been tough, just in terms of my personal loss, and also the sense of I have to go find what's going on now.
He was a great figure in the industry.
Yeah.
Just on a different, what's Gil's collection? Not your book collection, but what of your art collection of original?
I don't buy too much.
Yeah.
I used to get sketches at cons. I got a bunch of Jaime Hernandez sketches and Beto Hernandez of various Love and Rockets characters, a couple of Jim Woodrings. That was 15, 20 years ago. I have a page of Hicksville by Dylan Horrocks. If you have not read Hicksville, is one of the greatest comics of all time.
on the list, but it's actually not easy to get now.
Yeah, it may have gone in and out of print.
Yeah, because he's
of course, I have several copies at home because this is the guy I am. But yeah, Hicksville is one of the all-time greats, and I have a page of that.
I will bump it up the list.
A couple of pages by one of my favorite cartoonists who's here in London, Roger Langridge.
Right.
New Zealand cartoonist who moved to UK. I've got a couple old ones of his that always bring me joy. One of Sammy's prints, A Golem in the Forest, I bought from The Beguiling in Toronto. Page of Eddie Campbell from the second collaboration he did for an art book with Alan Moore, Snakes and Ladders. In addition to From Hell, the big
and you've got
anthology.
these all framed around.
Some of them
house?
I have framed. Yeah, the other great ones. One of Tom's comic strips he did when he worked with an illustrator on a comic strip called Wildwood, and he used a passage of Hegel that I had turned him on to because that's why the comic strip
You're not running
never
out
succeeded.
of wall space just yet.
That's the problem. I've got a lot of stuff that I can't put up.
And also your other half will...
Well, it's just downstairs in my library. The walls are bookshelves. We've mounted everything in, so there's not a lot of space. Oh, I forgot the greatest thing I've gotten in recent years. Bill Griffith's Zippy the Pinhead comic strip, the dailies. Every morning that comes out by email, and there's a buying link if you want the originals or a reproduction. And he did a week of Edward Hopper-inspired strips, and the very first one is this sort of empty room, light coming in, all this cross-hatching. Zippy is sitting in the middle, and he's just saying, I wish I knew what it was like to slow down. And I just I just hit the buy button. I'm like, I don't even care what the rest of this week is like. I'm getting Monday's strip from Bill. And $400 later it showed up.
He's got a new book coming out.
Yeah, I know. I got to follow up with him and get up to Connecticut to record. But that's when you ask about doing this stuff, the first time Bill and I got together was a day that I was pretty burned out. It was a Sunday. I was recording with him and then with the poet Sandy McClatchy, who is married to Chip Kidd, who is the great book designer and also comics writer now. So I had this long drive up to Bill's place and then over to Stonington to record with Sandy and then hours and hours to drive home. The day included about 8.5 to 9 hours on the road, in addition to the 2 podcast sessions. And as the day was starting and I'm sitting in traffic in Connecticut, I'm thinking, what the hell am I doing this for my life? I don't get this. By the time I was on the way home, it was, it doesn't matter. This is what your life is. This is what gives you meaning and purpose. You just keep going. Because Bill was fantastic. Sandy, completely different, this highbrow poet and the guy who does Zippy the Pinhead. And the conversations with both of them were just so fulfilling to me and what I knew people were going to get from those conversations.
Of your recordings I've listened to, I think the Bill Griffiths ones are
very first time with Bill. There was that moment I always talk about where he just starts opening up about depression, and I was like, I did not ask about that, and I'm not going to say when you talk about listening. That was just going to sit back and let this guy talk because this is something that matters to him, and I asked an innocuous question that led to it, but that's part of the realization with the recording, and I don't know if you experience the same thing with interviewing. Some people have never been asked questions about their lives. And when you do that, they start hearing themselves. They start talking about things they may never have thought about talking about. And I guess therapy might be like that. I've never gone, but I've had guests where I know, nobody's ever really asked you what brought you to New York and why you do this thing that you do, but let's start talking, and they will unfold in front of you and in front of themselves, which is, the joy of doing this stuff. My favorite was another London episode with Posey Simmons, where
and I've been lucky enough to meet Posey a few times because she's still going, and there's a big comics festival in Harrogate in the north of England next weekend. I'm not able to go, but she's doing something up there.
Yeah, when she was the big guest at Angoulême, that was the thing. I was like, she deserves all the
she's great.
But her thing was, with all of this apparatus in front of us, she said, I forgot we were recording this. Right. And I was like, that's a good feeling. We just
she's
connect.
Great. Absolutely, No, I've been privileged enough to see her a few times. I've got her 3 or 4 books all signed, and she actually had an exhibition at the Pompidou in Paris. Yeah, and we got there, It was about a couple of years ago, and it was like, oh, it was closed for cleaning or something. I was only in Paris for.
Yeah,
it's just so annoying. But
I usually had that with the Mondays thing. Oh, I'm going to go. Oh, you're all closed on Monday. Never mind. That's the one day I had free before.
I was actually in Helsinki on Monday for business, and towards the end of the day, we were done, and I noticed they've got a Moomin exhibition at the. I thought, well, I'll try it out, but Monday.
You just look through the window.
Yeah, exactly.
What are you looking forward to reading?
So
you do have your big to be read pile.
The to be read pile. I've not read Asterius Polyp.
It keeps coming up. I've not read it on mic. I've been talking with people about Mazzucchelli the last couple of
Well, obviously, Mazzucchelli's become in the news since the New York trilogy. We've got, obviously, I talked about Ginseng Roots. I need to read that. Joe Sacco is coming to London next week, so I'm going to hear him talk. His book is about, I think his latest book is about India and Pakistan.
Could be.
Yeah.
I would assume he's also going to, well, actually, here in the UK, I don't know if he's going to talk about Israel and Palestine, but
I'll try and avoid that.
I would at least read about his work in that space.
I've not read that. I mean, for me, it's too close to home to be talking about that. Yeah. But his latest book is about India and Pakistan.
You should check out Safe Area Garage.
I've actually got that, and I'm going to get that signed. So Sacco.
That was something. Yeah.
So I'll be looking forward to reading that. I'm reading a Swedish World War II graphic novel at the moment, which is fantastic. It's been and Remember Us Life by Joanne Granger. And if I got the name wrong,
you'll add it afterwards, and I'll
exactly.
Well, a few weeks
it's
before
a
this
magnificent.
One goes.
It's calling it the Swedish Mouse. No, it's a really I interviewed her about a year ago, but sometimes it takes that long to read it. But it's a big 300-400 page, and you're thinking it's a comic, so it'll be quick, but it's not.
There can be a density to some of these things.
It needs a few sittings to read it. So those are.
I would say with the Craig Thompson, it is broken out. I mean, it was published serially, so you can put it down after a chapter and get back. So that's part of the. You don't have to commit to 500.
It's good to sometimes have. So Alison Bechdel, she came to London actually before she went to Basel. So went to hear her speak, and I got the new book, Spent.
Yeah, heard great stuff.
Really good book, because she sort of. I try and stay away from politics, but she satirizes it. It's a really. I really recommend that book. But it's also quite dense. Like it's a it's one of these funny things about comics is the value for money. Sometimes people.
I blew through this in 2 minutes. Yeah.
So there's a couple of authors for Avery Hill. Avery Hill is a UK.
Yeah, I'm on their publicity list, so I see things that they're putting out. But
two authors I would want to mention. One is Owen Pomeroy, who has written. He wrote a book called Victory Point. He's quite big on Substack and Instagram, and he does these beautiful prints. And I've got actually a signed copy framed in my house. But he wrote this book called Victory Point, which was about maybe 60, 70 or 80 pages. But it's almost like poetry. Yeah. It's just doesn't matter that it's not. You can read it, come back to it. It's so that. And there was another one called Tim Bird, who's written a book called Adrift on Sea, which is also similar length, but again meditative. And interesting on the subject of exhibitions, Avery Hill are now doing an exhibition of all of their UK authors.
Nice.
up in Harrogate. I'll have to get there at some point. It starts, I think, next weekend, and it's on till the end of April. So, and there's someone else called Catriona Chapman.
That's the name I've seen.
So she works for Avery Hill. She's got.
Oh, that's it. That's who the emails come from.
But she's a really accomplished. She did a book called Breakwater, which again is up there. And if you can get. Catriona I don't want to push too many names.
Well, that was the funny thing
she's someone you should get.
When I got here Thursday night, recorded with Ryan Hughes, and he's like, there's some people I should probably connect you with while you're here. I'm like, Ryan, I'm not sure how much time you think I have, but I'm going to be recording, and I don't do these blind. I tend to do a little research beforehand. He's like, yeah, I'll give you some names and we'll work on people for the next time you're here. Maybe some of them will be remote people, but and that's to me part of the joy of doing this is also the proliferation.
When you get to the festivals, which is, I have, but
I cut that down the last year or two. And I was going to ask you whether you do festivals and conventions.
The festivals are not in a very convenient places in the UK.
Yeah, so the Lakes one is not.
The Lakes one is, to get there from London is not easy. Yeah. And then there's one in Harrogate, which is, again, not easy. That's next weekend. So
trust me, getting to Small Press Expo is a 4+ hour drive each way. And that's
in Bethesda. Actually, one of my best friend was married in Bethesda at that hotel, the Marriott.
That's where I hold my annual conference.
so I know that hotel very well. Yeah. But it's the beginning of September. We go to the US in August, and it's just never. And I one day I'll make it to Comic-Con, but I'd almost rather go to.
If you do that.
It's
everybody's there to sell stuff.
Yeah,
the hotels are far enough away from the convention center. You're not going to get time to just sit with somebody and talk. They either have signings to do or they're there selling. As what I discovered from and these are way back, my Comic-Con experiences. Smaller festivals, though, if there's names, people you want to see while you're there, you again reach out to them in advance and set something up. TCAF used to be great for us, the Toronto Comic Arts Festival, because it was the only city my wife would travel to for a comics thing because the restaurants are good.
I want to get to TCAF at one point. Yeah. And also, I went to Toronto once. I think it's a nice city. Yeah.
And the CXC in Columbus, that's the one connected to the Billy Ireland venue. That's great, and you'll find good people there, and there's time afterwards.
But Columbus isn't an easy place to get to.
No, especially from here. It's from New York.
It's a second plane journey. Yeah,
but that was the thing. From New York, it's all direct, and there are 1 million flights a day, and it was one of those things I never understood. And Tom Spurgeon helped launch CXC, and I'd asked him finally, why are there 6 flights daily from Columbus to Newark? I have no idea why this. Insurance industry. I'm like, oh, never mind. Okay. They happen to still be located there, and guys are shuttling back and forth. So United just kept it going. It becomes the challenge of finding the good shows, and anything that's like super scale.
Exhibitions, as I said, I was at the. I was in New York in May, so I went to the Society of Illustrators. So they had
the Peter Cooper thing.
Peter Cooper, Insectopolis. So I took my family to that. That was an interesting one, and there was another. The New Yorker, they've been doing things for their 100th anniversary. So they had an exhibition in Grand Central. It was a good visit.
Yeah, the city's got a lot of opportunities. I'm 25 miles away, so it's I can get in for some of these things, but. When people have things going on a weeknight and it starts at 8, I'm like, it's not.
So there's going to be in London, in the UK, there's a Quentin Blake Centre for Illustration that is hopefully going to open in 26. Yeah. So I think that's an opportunity. We have a cartoon museum in London. Occasionally I've been to events there, but it's they've got an exhibition at the moment. But it's not the type of exhibitions that I'm rushing to.
Yeah. But it's a big question. Holy crap moments of like, I can't believe this person is giving me the time of day interviews?
Not really. I'm going to have to think. So on my
you didn't have any where you were incredibly nervous that, oh my God, I don't want to. Good. Because that's a secret. And a few people have pointed it out who are not regular listeners. I did not do a good job with Chris Ware. I was.
Oh, I thought it was.
People cut me slack for that one, but I was talking too much.
Yeah.
And it's fine. Chris and I have stayed in touch, which is nice, but that was one of those, I was kind of burned out at SPX, and I kind of just had the, oh my God, this is Chris Ware, I better be super impressive.
I've not had too many in that list on, what do you call it,
there's either the white whales or the holy crap, I can't believe I've got this.
You call it, there's you've got the Mount Rushmore.
Oh yeah, that's my. Yes, yeah. When you mentioned Tomina, he was in that cohort at SPX all those years ago, and it was just those young cartoonists have no idea who's sitting at this table. Yeah. My other embarrassing Tomina story is that we recorded remotely, and the way my setup works, once you finish talking, you hit stop, and then it uploads each of our audio files to the cloud, and that's where I get them. Yeah, I've got a local recording that I do, but it's better audio from each side. And he had this incredibly slow connection. And you could just see the progress bar just creeping and creeping. And I said, Adrian, I know you need to go take care of your kids. How about I just mute this line so I can't hear anything happening at your house? Please don't quit the browser. Let's just let this thing, whenever it finishes, I will end the session so you don't have to be at your desktop. But this was after about 7 or 8 minutes of sitting there, and it's around 3 or 4%. I'm like, I can't believe I'm eating up all of Adrian's day. We don't have enough to talk about after we finish recording. I better just find a way to let him leave and not have to deal with it. So again, that's the joy of doing these things in person. But what's your next comics thing? What are you doing?
Well, it's too early to. So I've only in the last few weeks started to draw my own comics. I said that I want to sort of dedicate some time to it, but I want to do an anthology of some sort. Mm-hmm. I've got a number of stories, but at this stage it's very high level. So
okay. If it becomes a Kickstarter, we'll do the Dean Haspiel thing and help people know.
I just feel like there's a number of anecdotes and stories. And I think Matt Madden's constraints is a really good way of going into it. Like you just stick to 6 panels, or you stick to
it's got to have this letter shows up But what do you feel you need to get better at in terms of drawing or storytelling?
Well,
since you're starting,
since I've done I've even set myself a target to do a strip by Christmas. The most difficult bit is choosing what to do in the panels. Everything else is simple. Like the drawing, because it doesn't need to be of a
you're not doing hyper realistic.
Exactly. I've gotten over that. Your style is your style. Your limitations, obviously you can improve, but it's choosing. In fact, it's even more important when you are limited in your drawing capability. Is choosing what to. It's because the more you read, the more you notice how that flow goes.
This was the story of that 2-pager, which I think I've said on mic. I had to figure out how to show the moment that I saw dead man lying there in his bed, who I was supposed to record a podcast with. And every time I tried to figure out how to draw it from the angle at which I saw it, you run into the problem of the foreshortening of this giant foot right in front of the frame, because that's what's sticking out. And I was like, I'm not drawing exactly what I saw. I need to draw what the reader needs to see, and figuring out there are other angles and other ways to show it became that's how you make comics. You're not a camera. You are trying to figure out what the most useful version is, and do that in an artistic way, as opposed to trying to record things.
And remind me, what's this? You're doing a contribution to?
It's an anthology of Only in New York, and Dean Haspiel insisted, Gil, you have to draw a 2-page comic and get this thing done. I'm sure you've got a story. I'm like, I do have a story.
One of my inspirations is Jonathan Bayliss.
I'm so glad to connect you guys with Sew Buttons, because
so I like the fact that he's basically said, I can't draw. I'm going to get other art, and that's a great way to. So I think if I ever did something, and there's accountability now that's going to be on the podcast, that I would get 2 or 3 artists. You'd have to pay them, but get them to do their bit.
Yeah, and that's what I pitched to Dean. He's like, nope, you got to draw this yourself. I'm like, well, okay, I will figure out how to draw this, and over-scripted the entire thing. Not too much writing, but...
Have you got the latest version of Sew Buttons?
I picked it up at SPX.
Because I know that Jonathan Bayliss...
He put out a new one. It's got it's an 80s superhero reference of a cover, so you're not going to have that.
He works with this cartoonist called Jay Kirsch.
I'm blanking on that.
Yeah, but they had a deal that for this version, Kirsch was going to do the writing and Bayliss was going to do the drawing. So I don't know whether they can.
I don't think it's in this one. I think they focus on his dad in this one. But there's always the fun of doing that. And I think Alan Moore had that a bazillion years ago, where he was writing somebody else's drawing, and they as a joke flipped it. He also had the strip he was writing and drawing in some magazine, and he and another guy exchanged their strips, and the other guy killed all of Moore's characters. So I just decided to end it there and then. But
did you ever read there was the Bob Mankoff, the legendary New Yorker.
Yeah.
So he had a memoir which included a lot of the strips from it, and I think there was a funny line where David Mamet said to him, "Can I do a cartoon for the New Yorker?" And he says, "Sure. When I put on a play next week for the
stay in your lane."
Exactly.
That tends to be good advice as far as the arts go.
His view was, New Yorker cartoon. If you get in the New Yorker, it's like playing for the Yankees. It's within that.
That was another one of my greats. Ed Sorel sold his very first submission. Therefore, my career is finished. I'm just going to be a New Yorker guy from here on. 18 months before they bought another one. And this is 1950, I think 1951. So it was one of those, my career is made. I'm golden all the way through. And then you discover you have to keep proving it week after week after week.
Yeah, exactly. So. But it's a great book, actually. I don't know if you've...
No, I haven't read it. I saw the documentary that
the documentary, to be fair, is, that gives you a good...
But... Yeah. Again, there's always more stuff to check out as we started this conversation with everything that we haven't gotten to.
No.
But I'm looking forward to reading The English GI finally. I apologize for not getting to it, but I just can't read on PDF on screen anymore.
That's something nowadays is you do get PDF review copies sent, but I can get it up on my iPad. Okay for plane journeys,
but you need to shrink a little to be able to read stuff and zoom in and page after page. But, I prefer the tactile, and
that's why I think comics is it's still the paper copies. I know Dean Haspiel said that. I think he said, because I didn't
no digital for the anthology.
And with Amazon, it tells you exactly how many you've sold, and there has been, I'd say maybe 10% is it digital, but
that's just what we prefer and what readers want to see.
I don't like digital for prose books. I just prefer
we spend too much time looking at screens.
Exactly, it's not healthy.
I still marvel over the number of YouTube viewings of this show because it's just a static image. I'm like, you can use any podcast thing to play this audio instead, but for some reason people want to have this image sitting there on YouTube while they listen to this. Strangest thing. But again, finding the audience halfway, giving them what they want while making sure you're making art. That's our thing. So, last questions for me. Anything you were hoping to find out, or have I revealed too much already?
No. For me, this is. I've listened to your podcast for many years just to meet you in person and in London, which is great. Shame it couldn't get you up to Golders Green, but maybe next time. But that was you've got a...
my mom is from there. Right. A few years ago, before the pandemic, I went up,
I remember
found her address and sent her pictures of her old place. I forget now.
Yeah.
But it was this whole going to her old school and all this, and it was just... it was great, but I've learned trying to recapture or retrace something you did that was special the first time.
Exactly. It's pretty unremarkable.
And I was afraid of scaring your kids with my hair and everything else too. So, But Jonathan, thanks so much for coming on. And when you're in either Montclair, New York, etc.,
I'll be sure to look you up.
Yeah, and I can hook you up with some writers and artists.
That'll be much appreciated.
Cool.
And that was Jonathan Sandler. Go subscribe to his graphic memoir blog and go get the English GI. You can find links to do all that at his site, graphicmemoir.co.uk. Spelled just like it sounds, graphic memoir is all one word. He's also on Instagram at SandlerJ1978. J is the letter J, not J-A-Y. That is also all one word. And if you are an illustrator, author, publisher, comics person, whatever, and would like to be featured in a Q&A or have your book reviewed on his site, feel free to drop Jonathan a line. And he is at sandlerj@yahoo.co.uk. Thanks for listening to the Virtual Memories Show. You can support this podcast by telling other people about it. There's no better way to build an audience than through word of mouth. Also, visit Apple's podcast page for us and leave a rating and review. Every little bit helps, You can also support the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it and who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or comic or theater or art exhibition or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me a postcard, letter, email, DM if we're connected on Instagram or Blue Sky, or by leaving a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. Messages can be up to 3 minutes long. It'll cut you off after that, so call back and leave another message if you do. And let me know if it'd be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with our listeners, but I'd never run someone's message without their permission, so let me know. Now, if you've got money to spare, I appreciate it, but don't give it to me. I've got a day job that pays the bills. You should give to individuals and institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Crowdfunder, Indiegogo, all those crowdfunding platforms, where you'll find people who really need help just trying to make ends meet or get an artistic project going, covering medical bills or car payments or veterinary bills, and just a few dollars from you might make a real difference in their lives. Now, when it comes to institutions, I give to my local food bank and World Central Kitchen every month, but there are a lot of other things you can give to the Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds, Election Funds, Planned Parenthood, and Women's Choice. There's a lot of things you can do with your money to try to help build a better world, so I hope you'll give. Now, our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You can visit my archives at vmspod.com to check out my 2018 conversation with Hal, where you can learn more about his art, his music, and more. And you can follow Hal on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. That's MAY, the number 4, TH. And that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download all our past episodes at Apple Podcasts and other podcast sources. And you can find all my episodes and sign up for the Virtual Memories Show newsletter at vmspod.com. And I'm also on Blue Sky and Instagram and YouTube as vmspod. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.